Welcome back to Gun Tote Minnesotan. Today I have a product that I've collaborated with Bear Force Knives with. They sent this out to the channel for review. This is the multi-grind simple knife. I've done a review of a simple prototype in the past of the 1/16th version. This one happens to be a 1/8 version. I believe it's out of 52-100 high carbon steel. It's an excellent hybrid multi-grind knife. Very much so enjoyed it. Got this personal little island here all to myself for the day that nobody else could seem to navigate to, and so I went out and filmed a lot of my review here and then also in my home. I hope you enjoy this review and stick around to the end so you can get some of the links and information about custom Bear Force knives. Alright, let's take a look at this sheath. So Kydex is definitely something that Bear Force Knives is known for doing well. This is a cool texture design. It almost looks like kind of a roughed leather, but it is in fact a Kydex sheath. Of course, with every Bear Force knives, you're going to find that the sheath is very, very smooth. There's nothing here that has a bunch of rough or sharp edges. This has all been, kind of melded together really nicely and sanded after that. There's no little spurs or rough patches on any of it. It does have a drainage hole right here. It's probably kind of hard to see with this lighting. There is a drainage hole down there, and then there's also a drainage hole right there on that side and on that side. It also helps you just see that your blade is in all the way. So that's cool. You're not going to have a bunch of water or moisture retention. That's good to know. The rivets are all done extraordinarily well. They're all pressed properly and they rolled properly into place. You can see that the form factor of the sheath is not bad at all. It's actually relatively small. I'm just going to place this out. You can see that's a pretty tight package overall. It's not taking up an unnecessary amount of space, and yet somehow with a knife that does not technically have a lot of feature to the handle as far as finger grooves or anything to snap into place, you can actually see that this knife it snaps into place a little bit. It's not as much of a pop into place, but I can feel it, and it's got enough tension from this little dip right here where it's not going anywhere. It's going to stay in there, and it does hold it upside down. Okay, for those of you who really are concerned about that, I would not do that anyways, especially with a knife like this. But when you're on the trail and you're walking or hiking, I'm just not concerned about this jumping out of this thing at all. If you were really concerned about that, I suppose you could do something with a lanyard here to clip it in there if you're really aggressive in your hiking or your walking or whatever. I like the sheath a lot, especially the fact that he puts in these little thumb ramps. The thumb ramp is just a nice extra feature. You don't get that on a lot of big box knife company sheaths. They just don't necessarily have something like that, but that's to help you have a consistent place to push off from and index the knife the same way every time. And forgive me as I do this behind the camera. There we go. The clip is a really high quality clip. These are new to me. I'm not sure how long he's been using these actually, because I had a different clip previously. I like this one a lot because it has a lashing hole or a pass-through on one of the eyelets here. So you could do something with that still. It does have the, I think it's called Chicago style hardware here, which is really high quality hardware, and he puts the Phillips head on the back there, so it's just a nice clean look on the front. It's a very clean looking sheath, I think, overall. And it's also thin enough, you can fit this through MOLLE. You can fit it through pretty much everything. It's not too thick, which is usually the issue with some clips, is they're just too thick. This one is not. So it's a nice feature there. It is going to fit on my 1.5 inch belt just fine. And another thing that's maybe hard for you to see in there, maybe you can see just right there, there's actually a little bit of a reverse tab right there. I think you can see it. There's a reverse tab that allows it to stay on your belt a little better, so it doesn't just slip off. It's not just using the pressure and the tension of the clip, which is plenty much. It's actually using that tab as well to keep that guy from trying to navigate off your belt. So a little bit of confidence there. You're not going to lose this. This is a high quality blade, and I would be heartbroken if I lost it. That's the truth. Handmade knives, stuff like this, it's going to ruin my day if I lose it, for sure. And so I like seeing a really good clip on a really good knife like this. The sheath, again, indexing it is pretty darn smooth. It's a nice form factor, fits into place really good. I like it. Enough of the handle is sticking out, just enough to be a little showy. It's kind of cool. It's a very nice sheath overall. and it definitely grabs people's attention when they look at it. As far as the position on the belt goes, I tend to wear it just right at my side like that. And the clip does allow for some movement, rearrangement there, just like that. And I would say it's very, very comfortable. Again, the handle doesn't protrude too much, nor does the blade. It's a fairly compact package, and it's not going to protrude from your belt. It's not going to stick way out there. And so it actually fits under the shirt just fine. When I'm hiking, I kind of start with it like that. And then when I'm actually going to use it, I might just leave it out there. And if you're the kind of guy who maybe you have a gun in that position and you want to wear it more down in your pocket, technically you could wear it down in there. And I've actually worn it on the left side in my left pocket because it has that clip. I can hide most of the knife away in my left pocket and just pull it out when I need it. But I prefer it on my belt in the kind of conditions I'm in right now when I'm hiking around big rocks and it's not particularly safe to have something in my pocket like that. I prefer just to put it on my belt like that right there. And that seems like the best way to carry it for me. Nice, comfortable carry, very classy setup. Get a lot of people commenting on it or wanting to see it. So let's go ahead and pull it out again. Put that aside. Looking at the handle itself, this is a really, really nice, smooth handle. I like this one a lot. The materials, the ergonomics, just the way that it feels in hand is very, very good. I think that's every single Bear Forest Knives. He puts a lot of time and thought into ergonomics. I can tell because every blade I've had is just comfortable and there's no sharp edges, not even inside here, honestly. Inside the lanyard hole itself, it's not sharp in there. It's been, I don't know, maybe just buffed a little bit. It doesn't take much to take the ridge off there, so I appreciate that. It's those little things on a handle like that that really bother me when I get a custom knife or handmade knife. I don't want to see that on there, and so I'm glad that this knife doesn't have any of it. And it's pretty extreme. The match up, the mating of surface here, right here on this pin, you can see, I just can't even tell that that's a part of the handle. You don't feel any transition with your finger. It's incredibly smooth. It's just meeting up perfectly. This right here, the polishing job on everything is extra superior. Very, very nice. All the way down to the tang here. Just an exemplary job of making this knife, feel like a custom, because it is. Move up here, and just something that I particularly notice and appreciate, the transition here is slightly beveled. Hopefully you can see that. The transition is slightly beveled from scale all the way down to steel. There's a bevel there, and first of all, it makes it look cool. It's aesthetically really neat, and I know a lot of us care about that, especially when you get into customs. You want it to look good. It looks really cool, but aside from that, functionally, it's very soft. That's a nice soft transition, and when I'm doing bushcraft stuff, doing carving, anything with a knife, I don't want a sharp edge up here by my thumb or on this side with my finger, because I get really close up on that edge. I'm right up there, and no, I've never cut myself like that. It's not an issue. But depending on what kind of grip you're gonna have, it's just a nice, comfortable transition. I have big hands. As you can tell, the handle is still big enough for me. Not a concern, guys. I wear XL size gloves. If you wear XXL, it might be a tad short for you if your hands are just that big and you're a mountain man. Maybe for you, you'll have to look at the next one up or a bigger size or request a different kind of custom. But for me, this handle fits very, very well. And again, XL size hands. I don't need a handle that protrudes longer than that to do like really hard carving bushcraft work. In fact, sometimes a longer handle makes it more difficult to be technical with on a blade where I'm going to do some carving and some bushcraft. And being a multi-grind, which we'll talk about in a second, I actually prefer the handle to be a little bit more like this, as long as it maintains a proper thickness, which this one obviously does. It's a nice broomstick style handle, very classic, and this is essentially what every bushcrafter wants. provided that you pick a good piece of wood. This thing can curl really nice. I'm going to clear off a spot here and just do a few curls after it's cleaned. Get the bark off that I don't want there. It's a pretty hard piece of wood, which usually for me makes nice curls. Just consistent wood in general. And being a multi-grind, some people are probably concerned that it's not going to curl the same way because you're experiencing two different grinds. But you have to remember that with this multi-grind in general, the edge itself, as far as the geometry goes, the edge is not reduced as far as the actual physical location of where the edge is. It's not inset, it's not like serrations or something in there. It's uniform all the way through. It's just that the tapering there is thinner on this multi-grind, and so there's a higher shoulder and a lower shoulder technically, which for me has not been a problem. Let's see if I can throw a few good feathers down here. And I'm going to try to use both sides just to show you. Traditionally when I use a knife for feather sticks, I don't do a lot towards the tip. I usually try to run the knife just through the part closest to the handle. But I'm going to use both sides here to make feathers, just to show you that I'm not having issues transitioning between the different grinds there. And this is just a random stick I picked off the ground. Nothing extra special. I can do better feather sticks when I pick, better wood. But this is just a stick off the ground. And I'll show you here in a second. So there it is. Just a stick off the ground, an average stick. That's easily what you're going to see. The multi-grind did not inhibit me from actually producing, fine enough curls to catch with a fire steel. And just to show you that the knife has a sufficiently, sharp spine, I'll throw a few sparks here on this guy and try to plant this down, and it's a pretty sharp spine actually. I'm throwing plenty of sparks. It's more the fire steel. That was the issue there, and a little bit of the wind. But it works just fine. I really don't have any concerns about this. That's a very, very sharp BushCraft, complementary type spine there all the way through. If you do order a custom knife from Bear Forest Knives, one feature that I think I can recommend is the rock tumbled acid wash finish. It's kind of like a rustic finish that you get on some of these blades, and I like it a lot. I really like the way that it patinas, because I like to get a natural patina going on all my blades. Sometimes I'll force a patina, but most of the time I don't even need to, because I'm going to be sharpening in it, and it's just, it looks a little better in my opinion when I just get a natural patina going. And if you do any kind of kitchen work, if you're cutting fruit or vegetables with it, eventually you will get a patina on there, and I actually think it looks better, especially with this simple knife. It's just a real rustic look to it, and with the rock tumbled acid wash on top of that, it all melds together really nicely. Looks good. Now, talking about cutting performance, I was just doing some notches on kind of a really hard piece of wood that I had here, very difficult to carve. And one reason I like to do it on a really hard piece of wood is it tells me a little bit more about the handle and the edge geometry, rather than just using another soft piece of wood where you kind of could get deceived about the performance of the blade. So I grab a hard stick like this that's been sitting out in the sun way too long and do some notches with it, and it tells me a little bit about it. The cool thing was I found that the edge geometry, yes, it is slightly different, being that there's less behind the shoulder or behind the edge, less material on both halves, but it didn't mess with me. If you can see here as I'm doing this chest lever, I'm actually using both parts of the grind. I'm starting with the deeper portion and then moving to the thinner portion, and my guess is it might actually help it relieve a little bit of the stress in the wood and cut better, which is kind of an interesting thing. I thought maybe the higher shoulder would provide more of the Scandi feature when working with wood, but it almost seems like it slips through better with that relief cut as it's tapered technically. When you look at the spine, it doesn't look terribly tapered, but you can tell obviously when you look at the side profile, the broad profile of the blade. And it's very, very comfortable. Again, the handle is built to do the kind of things that you're seeing right here. I'm not worried about the fact that it doesn't have a guard. I didn't cut myself. I didn't have any even near misses with that, but I'm very used to it. So if you need to practice a little bit, give yourself a little space so you don't choke up too close on that blade. But I'm really comfortable with that. I grew up using knives like that right there that didn't have, technically any kind of guard, and I've never needed it, and my fingers are still doing just fine. This cut right here, as I'm digging in, it's kind of the traditional notch that you make when you're making maybe a tent peg or a tarp peg, something like that. And if I'm going to bring a knife with me and it's going to be worth anything at all, it has to be able to hammer something out like this with whatever I find on the ground when I'm making tent pegs or tarp pegs, because I don't bring those with me on backpacking trips. And so the blade has to be able to do at least that. And the nice relief cuts that I was able to make on the thinner part of the forward edge of the blade, it allowed me to dig in there just a little bit more. One thing I don't see enough of in knife reviews is food processing. That's one thing I do a lot of with any fixed blade that I have, any folding knife that I have. If it's on me, I'm probably going to use it for food as long as it's clean. And this is an easy blade to maintain, particularly because it's in a Kydex sheath, and it's just really easy for me to go from using it outside and getting it dirty, being out in the woods with it, and then clean it off with that Kydex sheath. I can just wash it out, dry it really quickly, and then it's back on my belt again for whatever need I have. I do tend to use food grade oils on a lot of my carbon steels, and on the stainlesses, not so much. As long as I keep them dry, they're fine. So grapes are a good medium to cut against here, and these ones happen to be, really squishy grapes. They're not bad, but they're pretty squishy. They're not very taut or tight. And so this knife has a cool thing going for it, and I'm trying to show it to you right there. Because there's a dual grind that you can see, it's a little thicker behind the shoulder here, not obnoxiously thick. It's a nice high grind. I actually think he did a fantastic job on bringing that shoulder up. I'm not a fan of low Scandi grinds most of the time, unless it's extremely thin, which there is a simple knife version that is very thin. But this one's more of a standard thickness for, an outdoors or EDC type fixed blade from me. And the cool part of having the multi-grind is that this part can remain thick and it can be strong, and it cuts in really deep for working with wood, which is the primary portion I use right there. I do a lot of my woodworking right here. And then when I move to food, I do have this portion right here, the shiny spot you're looking at. This is thin behind the shoulder, and it's got a reduced cut there, and I can do push cuts on this, which would normally, with a blade that's not thin enough or sharp enough, it would just smush it. And even with something that's a little thicker behind the shoulder, there's just less material in general that I have to worry about behind the shoulder of that edge right there. So this is a really, if you think about it, this is actually a really functional design for a blade that a person's going to use, and it's not going to be just a safe queen. Nothing wrong with that. If you like safe queens, that's your thing. But I'm going to tell you, this grind is very complimentary for most people who actually use a knife. And so I'm going to cut up a little bit more here, and it's slicing through, and I can do crazy thin slices like that, just transparent thin. Let's see, grab that. And that's a really, really thin slice. I hope you can tell just how incredibly thin that is. So it's a pretty functional grind overall. Here's a tomato. Let's try a tomato. And I'm gonna get in the way of the camera for a second. Tomatoes, again, it's another one. If you wanna do really thin slices, generally a thicker knife is hard to use, but because this has a dual grind, I've got two pieces that I can, actually went so thin that it kind of split in half. Like I was saying, I have two pieces here to get really nice thin slices. So of course it's gonna do your food processing no problem. Comfortable handle and easy to choke up on and do different things. Like I said, push cuts and finer tasks, maybe in skinning and things like that. This would be an easy blade to index because you have a place to hold on to, just like that right there. And if you're poking into a gut cavity and you're working through the knife, this kind of gives you a reference point in low light situations. And yes, I have done deer up in low light situations. Not that I try to, but sometimes it happens and you end up bringing out your knife. This is a nice setup for skinning now that I think of it. Scandis traditionally are not a skinning knife, but it does have a really sharp edge and it would be very easy to touch up. Just saying. So that's cool. How about an apple? Let's move on to an apple. All right, this time we'll go with an apple. And Scandis tend to blow things apart. especially if they're a little thicker, they tend to just kind of blow apples apart or slices apart. But this one, if I just do kind of a slicing pressure cut, it's acceptable. I wouldn't say that knives with this grind are designed for food, but it's certainly not outside the wheelhouse of capability. As you can see, it's going to do the job just fine. No issues with, really popping apart, but it's just not going to slice through the way that a flat grind was. If you want flat grinds, you need specifically a flat grind. Obviously, you could check out his other customs and production knives. Bear Force Knives has stuff that would be more in line with maybe what you would enjoy or appreciate in the kitchen. But for me, I need a knife that can do all those things and just do it competently, and this works. It's not having a hard time doing these simple tasks. It's not giving me extra work or making it more complicated than it needs to be. So I think it's going to do just fine in the kitchen as well. Arya, do you want to try? Okay, come here. I'm going to let my daughter try. Come here, Arya, come to this side of the table. I'm going to let you hold the knife with your right hand. Okay, like this. And all I want you to do is go right here and push down and tell me if it's hard. Okay, you can push down. Straight. Well, that wasn't too hard, was it? Did it do a good job? Is the knife sharp?
Yeah.
It's pretty sharp? Let's do one more. Cut it right in half. There you go. And you see how Daddy does it sometimes? Here, let's move this aside. Sometimes I use the round part and I go backwards like this, as long as my fingers are out of the way. And then some people will go like this and round up like that. And that's how you can cut it up too. There you go. Do you want the apple?
Sure.
Okay, it's yours. I want to take a second to read something that I discovered on the website, the Bear Force Knives website. And if you go to bearforceknives.com and you click on one of the simple knives, there's a really cool header and descriptor in there about BushCraft knives. And I want to read this and then I'll come back and explain why I think it's really important. Here's what he said. The quintessential BushCraft knife must be sharp, comfortable, and easy to sharpen. BushCraft knives should have the blade tip close enough to the center of the handle with an oval cross section. Okay, that's very important. And be free of protruding guards and finger grooves. The simple knife checks all the boxes and more. I really appreciate that the person who made this blade actually understands it. In the world that I'm in, which is both guns and blades especially, I'll meet gunsmiths who actually don't really shoot guns. They're just really, happy to work on guns and understand the mechanics. But when it comes to actually using the gun, they don't know what it's like to shoot. And there's always like a little bit of an information gap there or a barrier in conversation because they know how the mechanics work. They just don't know what it's like in practice. And developing guns and producing guns, it can be really complicated when you don't actually use them yourself. And the same thing is true with blades. I've met some talented bladesmiths personally who know how to make some knives, but they're really limited in the use, and sometimes they'll make something thinking it's good for something that it's not good for. The cool thing about these knives at Bear Force Knives is I truly do believe that he uses the knives he makes, and he thinks about it from a real-world example. And other people use the blades too, and I'm sure they give him feedback, and he's a very open kind of guy for that sort of thing. I always give him a little feedback on my experience with the blades. But he seems to be somebody who actually gets it, especially when it comes to bushcraft. This is something that I care about. It's a little bit personal to me because I don't think there's a lot of people who have the actual expertise to both produce blades and then also know what it means to have a bushcraft knife. And so just that little write-up that he had there was kind of a gem. You don't find many people who can do both. It's usually one or the other, so that was neat. And this blade would be a perfect example of somebody who knows how to make a blade, design a blade, because they both use it and they also work with metal. And so the pedigree here is very, very high. I'm quite sure that this blade is kind of the quintessential bushcraft knife. The broomstick handle, the thickness, the way that the grind is on that Scandi, and I'm going to say it again, the higher Scandi grind, even though it's only an eighth thickness, that's thick enough that you do need to bring up the shoulder usually a little bit to make guys like me happy anyways. And the duality of having a multi-grind like this with a properly higher shoulder, I think that tells me a lot about his knowledge of how blades respond to wood, in particular as a medium, but then also things like cutting through cardboard, food, like you're seeing right here, chopping up celery with the multi-grind. I think he did a really nice job in developing this. And multi-grinds, there's a few out there, but they usually suffer from some weaknesses. And this one suffers a lot less than the others. No blade can do all things perfectly, but this is bringing us closer and closer to the concept of not only a one-tool option for somebody who's real talented, but also a one blade that, kind of replaces my backup blade in a lot of ways because it has that duality to it. So I don't always feel tempted to bring two blades with me. I'm kind of happy just bringing this one. And when I'm going to the places that you're seeing right here, like in this video, when it's a long walk, if it's a long hike and it's 80, 90 degrees out, I do actually want to keep the weight down, but I don't want to bring a lightweight, breakable, or unusable knife, something that's just not really built to be used hard or do a lot of bushcrafting tasks. So me personally, when I'm speaking about just this custom knife that I received and the idea of the simple knife, I would say that this is a really, really good go-to blade. I could definitely see myself taking this on a big serious trip, a week-long trip. And, I always bring two blades, but it at least would be my primary blade, and whatever else I brought with would be an ultralight backup just for emergencies. So this is a quality blade. The custom aspect is absolutely there. I easily can recommend it at the price point. My personal opinion is when I look at custom blades, I think Bear Force Knives charges less than most of the custom outfits out there. And yet, the quality is still very, very high. It feels like a custom in all ways. I noticed even his packaging procedure, the way that I received the package in the mail, it's just got all the feel of you just purchased like the nicest knife you've ever had. And he's doing a really good job of that. So if you're looking to take a blade on an adventure, go check out bearforceknives.com. Go to the website. There's a bunch of customs there. They're already listed and already made if you want to see something a little more unique. And then he's also got production blades. And from time to time, he'll throw things up on there. Follow him over on Instagram as well. That's a great place to find out what he's been working on, projects that are in the works right now. And sometimes one-offs. You might find a one-off there that's really neat, and you might not see it ever again. That's one of the advantages of working through a custom operation like this, is you can get something that nobody else is ever going to have. And I feel like the custom that I have is something that you could take your idea to him and say, hey, how about this color scales or this or that, and maybe have a little conversation with him, and he'll let you know what is possible or what he can do for different price points. But as it is right now, when I'm producing the video right here today, which it's August 7th, 2023, there's a lot of inventory online right now. And if you're lucky, it's going to stay there for maybe a week or so, but then things start to rotate out, especially as we approach fall. If a Scandi grind is not exactly what you're looking for, if you're looking for a bigger knife or a smaller knife, there's a huge amount of variety on that website. And I highly encourage you to save your pennies, save your money, and go for a custom or go for something from Bear Force Knives, because the quality that you're going to get and the pride of ownership is just so much higher. Go check them out at bearforceknives.com.